22 pages. That's how long it took a team of independent analysts to say, in writing, what this entire case has been missing since day one. Not a suspect, not a cause of death. A gap. A documented hole in the timeline of Nolan Wells' final hours, one nobody has been able to close, even with photos, videos, and GPS data all laid out side by side. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly where that gap sits and exactly what it would take to finally close it. At the time this video was recorded, nearly a month had passed since Nolan disappeared, and this update is different from almost everything we've covered before. This isn't a press conference or a leaked recording. It's the first time anyone has taken every piece of public evidence in this case, the photos, the videos, the coordinates, the witness accounts, and formally tested whether they hold together as a timeline, rather than simply repeating what's already been said enough times to feel true. The answer they came back with is more honest than satisfying, and that honesty is exactly why it matters. This report is an independent analytical review, 22 pages long, built entirely out of materials already available to the public, cross-checked against each other for consistency. Its purpose was narrower than naming a suspect or defending anyone, and in some ways more useful than either of those things. Take everything we already have and ask, plainly, does it prove what everyone assumes it proves? The central finding is what the report calls a material gap, sitting precisely between the last independently corroborated sighting of Nolan and the departure time of the boat that carried his friends back without him. I want you to sit with that phrase for a second because it's doing very careful, very deliberate work. Independently corroborated doesn't mean somebody said it happened. It means multiple separate sources, not just one person's account, confirm the same fact the same way a courtroom would treat two unrelated witnesses agreeing on a detail very differently from one witness simply repeating themselves twice. And what this report is telling you in plain language is that once you strip away everything that's only been confirmed by a single source, a friend's statement, a secondhand text message, a screenshot with no verified metadata, what's left standing on its own 2 feet, is thinner than this entire month of coverage has assumed. Let me walk you through exactly what the report checked, piece by piece, because the specificity here is the whole point. GPS coordinates used during the search operation were compared against independently supplied mapping data, and they lined up. That's confirmed. Multiple photographs from that day were checked against each other and consistently show the same cluster of boats anchored in the same general area. That's confirmed too. Social media videos from the afternoon of July 4th provided additional reference points, timestamps, and backgrounds that could be cross-checked against the physical layout of the island itself. The report specifically flags that the boat names and labels appearing in those photographs are what it calls source annotations, meaning somebody wrote a caption identifying which boat was which. That's not the same as independent verification. Nobody confirmed those labels against a boat registry or an owner's own statement. They're simply what someone claimed the boat was when they posted the photo. And the timestamps embedded in social media screen recordings, the same category of evidence we've leaned on throughout this entire series, get an even more direct warning. The report states plainly that those timestamps cannot be accepted as definitive without access to the original files and their associated metadata, not just a screen recording of someone else's video played back on a different device. This cuts directly against something worth admitting honestly. Earlier in this series, we've treated certain timestamp clips, including the video believed to show Nolan at 2:23 that afternoon, as some of the strongest evidence available in this entire case. This report is a direct professional caution against exactly that kind of confidence. A timestamp on a screen recording of somebody else's video isn't the same as a verified original file with its metadata intact. Nobody has done the technical work yet to confirm that video's timing, and until someone does, It belongs in the same category as everything else in this case that sounds solid but hasn't been formally verified, not settled fact, just because a genuine independent review hasn't closed the question yet. Maybe the most significant single line in this entire 22-page document is this one. The available materials do not independently verify the time that Nolan's boat departed Horn Island. The 4:30 time we've repeated throughout this entire series, the same time everyone from Judge Ashley Cole to the friends themselves has cited consistently for a month, has never been independently confirmed by this report's own standard. It comes entirely from the accounts of the people who were on that boat. People telling a consistent story isn't proof of a lie, though one of the single most repeated facts in this entire case rests right now on exactly one category of source the testimony of the people who were there without a second independent form of confirmation standing behind it. That's worth sitting with too, because a month of consistent retelling has a way of hardening into certainty in the public mind, even when the underlying source of that certainty hasn't actually multiplied. One story told many times is still one story. The report doesn't guess at what would close that gap. It lists specific categories of evidence investigators would still need. Authenticated video metadata, meaning the original files themselves, not screen recordings of them. Actual vessel GPS records, the kind pulled directly from a boat's own chart plotter. The same category of evidence we've already seen investigators obtain from at least one person connected to this case. A complete list of who was on each boat that day, not an estimate, an actual roster. Additional witness statements, ideally from people entirely outside the existing friend group. And confirmation of exactly when each boat's position changed throughout that afternoon, tracked continuously rather than reconstructed after the fact from memory. I want to walk through why each of those 5 categories matters, because they're not arbitrary. Authenticated metadata would settle once and for all whether that 2:23 video genuinely shows what everyone assumes it shows, removing an entire category of doubt from this case in a single step. Vessel GPS records, pulled directly the same way investigators already pulled them from at least one boat, would establish movement with a precision no human memory can match the difference between someone saying, "We left around 4:30, and a machine logging the exact minute a boat's engine started moving. A complete occupant roster would finally answer a question this series has circled more than once: exactly how many people were on that water, and exactly who they were, rather than relying on rough estimates that have shifted from interview to interview. Independent witnesses, people with no personal relationship to Nolan or his friends, would carry a different kind of weight than testimony from inside a tight-knit group that's had a month to align its own story, whether or not that alignment is innocent. And continuous position tracking would replace a handful of scattered snapshots with a real moving picture of that afternoon, the kind of evidence that doesn't leave room for a gap in the first place. This report doesn't prove foul play or an accident or anything at all about what happened to Nolan. It stays away from any conclusion about criminal or civil responsibility. Think of it instead as an inventory, a careful accounting of exactly which parts of this month-long public conversation are resting on solid ground, and which parts have simply been repeated so many times they started to feel solid without ever being tested. That distinction matters more than it might sound like on first listen, because a case can generate a month of confident headlines without a single one of them being independently checked against anything. This isn't the only expert analysis working this case right now either. Ben Crump's own team has separately retained professional audio engineers to review the complete CTAL recording from start to finish, not the fragments and enhanced clips that have circulated online for weeks, but the entire call, examined by people whose findings could eventually stand up as expert testimony rather than a viral breakdown picked apart by strangers. Alongside that, his team is working with oceanic engineering experts specifically to examine the tides and currents around Horn Island that day. Crump has framed the question directly: We want to know, how is that possible with the oceanic tides? You've got low tides and high tides, so it's not adding up. That specific claim has already drawn real pushback. Skeptics have pointed out that tidal patterns in a location like this are genuinely complex, and that a body's movement through water depends on far more than simply which direction the tide happened to be running, including wind, current, and how long the body was submerged before recovery. Whether Crump's oceanic experts can produce something more rigorous than that public framing suggests remains to be seen, and it's exactly the kind of claim this report's own standard would demand independent verification for before anyone treats it as settled. Attorney Eric Hertz has also confirmed that discussions continue around a joint forensic examination of the cell phones connected to this case, an inspection he expects would include the FBI if it goes forward. Meanwhile, Dr. Roger Mitchell, the forensic pathologist who performed Nolan's independent autopsy, continues reviewing evidence gathered through the family's own investigation. After previously concluding that the cause and manner of death remained undetermined, pending exactly the kind of additional material this new report is now describing in such specific detail. It's worth noticing how these threads connect to each other rather than sitting in isolation. The missing neck structures from that autopsy, the unverified departure time, the disputed audio, the title question, all of it circles back to the same underlying problem. A case built on pieces that individually sound compelling, but that nobody has yet assembled into something that closes every gap at once. Meanwhile, the official side of this case has reached its own quiet milestone. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner has completed the state's autopsy, but exactly as officials said weeks ago, the findings won't be released to the public. Instead, they'll go directly to a Jackson County grand jury alongside whatever other evidence the sheriff's investigation has produced. District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath has continued to describe this approach as standard practice for her office, not a decision made specifically because of this case's national attention. Whether or not you find that explanation satisfying, it means the single piece of evidence most people have been waiting on for a month is now sitting complete, finished, sealed, and still entirely out of public view. Now, here's where this update turns from analysis into something with real, immediate legal consequences for real people. 3 of Nolan's friends, Warren Hudson, Jack Spatalo, and Morgan Seymour, are now the subjects of a public fundraising campaign that's already raised more than $90,000, specifically to cover anticipated legal costs. The campaign describes all 3 as having been wrongly blamed online and says the money will go toward defending against a potential wrongful death lawsuit while also pursuing defamation claims of their own against people who've accused them without evidence. All 3 maintain, as they have from the very beginning, that they cooperated fully with investigators. 2 of those names, Jack Spatalo and Morgan Seymour, haven't come up much in this series before now, which has centered mostly on Warren Hudson and Traxton Shepard. Their appearance now publicly attached to a legal defense fund tells you something about how this case has been operating behind the scenes this whole time. There have always been more people connected to that day than the handful of names that kept showing up in headlines, and a fund like this one, built around 3 specific individuals rather than the friend group as a whole, suggests these 3 in particular feel they've absorbed a disproportionate share of the public suspicion, whether or not that's fair. This case has split quickly into 2 entirely separate legal tracks, both moving at the same time. On one side, Nolan's family is actively preparing civil litigation, sending preservation notices, positioning for a lawsuit that could eventually force sworn testimony and compelled evidence. On the other side, 3 named friends now have a 6-figure legal defense fund specifically built to fight back against exactly that kind of pressure and to go on offense against their own accusers. Ben Crump has already dismissed the idea of competing lawsuits as a distraction from what matters. Christine Wansley's own response in a recent video was far simpler than any legal argument. I am asking for answers. That is it. That is all. That contrast captures something true about where this case stands right now. Two sets of lawyers, two fundraising pages, two competing legal strategies, all built on top of a case where the most rigorous, independent review of the evidence available concludes that the central timeline still has a hole in it nobody's closed. Both sides are lawyering up around a gap that, as of tonight, remains formally unresolved, which means both legal fights are, in a real sense, racing toward the same missing piece of information from opposite directions. Each side betting that whatever eventually fills that gap will end up vindicating them. There's one more thread from this week worth including because it shows how much energy this case is still generating almost a month in directions that have nothing to do with courtrooms at all. Mississippi's Public Safety Commissioner, Sean Tindell, issued a public warning that a toxicology report circulating on social media, one claiming to show specific findings about drugs or alcohol in Nolan's system, is entirely fraudulent. His statement was direct. The purported toxicology report from Nolan Wells circulating through social media on various outlets is fraudulent. Nolan's family, friends, and most importantly, Nolan himself, deserve better. No official toxicology report from either autopsy has been released publicly from either side as of tonight. If you see one circulating, whatever it shows, treat it exactly the way officials are asking you to, as fabricated content designed to look authoritative, not as an actual finding. This connects directly back to the 22-page report because the two things point at the same underlying problem from opposite directions. A rigorous, honest analysis of this case comes back cautious, careful, full of qualifiers and unanswered questions because that's what real evidence review looks like. A fabricated toxicology report, by contrast, comes back clean, confident, and specific because it was never built to survive scrutiny in the first place, only to spread quickly before anyone had time to ask where it came from. If something about this case ever sounds too complete, too tidy, too perfectly resolved, that's exactly the moment to slow down rather than share it. The two documents are almost mirror images of each other. One is careful precisely because it's real. The other is confident precisely because it isn't. And hundreds of miles away from Mississippi, in New Orleans, members of that community organized a second-line procession specifically to honor Nolan and to tell his family they aren't carrying this alone. One of the organizers, Reuben Evans, put it simply, "We're not afraid to question. We want answers. We just want the Wells family to know we are behind y'all." It's a reminder of something worth remembering after an update this dense with reports and fundraisers and competing lawsuits that underneath every procedural thread in this case is still a community in more than one city now that hasn't stopped showing up for a family it's never personally met. That specific image, a second-line procession, a tradition rooted in celebration as much as mourning, winding through New Orleans streets for a family that lives hours away in Mississippi, says something about how far this story has traveled beyond the facts of one afternoon on Horn Island. Nolan Wells has become, for a lot of people who never knew him personally, a stand-in for a much larger, older frustration about how cases like this one tend to get handled. That's part of why a 22-page technical report about GPS coordinates and video metadata is generating this much attention in the first place, because for a lot of people watching, this case stopped being just about one island a long time ago. Tonight, a rigorous, independent review of the public evidence has confirmed what a lot of careful viewers of this case have probably already sensed, that the timeline everyone's been repeating for a month has a real documented gap sitting right at its center, and that several pieces of evidence treated as solid, including video timestamps, haven't been independently verified yet. 3 friends now have real legal firepower behind them, willing to fight both a wrongful death claim and their own accusers at the same time. Officials are actively fighting fabricated documents designed to look like real findings. And a mother, asked to comment on all of it, still comes back to the same 4 words she started with a month ago. I am asking for answers. There's something strange about the fact that the most significant update in weeks isn't a new piece of evidence at all. It's a document that essentially audits everything we already had and comes back saying, plainly, some of it doesn't hold up the way we all assumed it did. That's not a satisfying kind of news, not after a month of following every twist in the story as closely as you have. But it's the honest, complicated version of where this case stands, not a tidier one that skips past exactly the questions still keeping this family up at night. I want to know what you think that material gap actually means. Does the fact that a truly independent review couldn't verify the 4:30 departure time change how confident you feel about anything else in this case? Or does consistent testimony from multiple people still count for something on its own, even without a second independent form of confirmation? Now, you also know that some of the video evidence discussed in earlier updates hasn't been formally authenticated yet, which might change which pieces of this story you personally trust the most. Tell me what you think in the comments, because this is one of the most genuinely open questions this series has raised in weeks. We'll be back the moment either autopsy result reaches the public or the moment anyone closes even one piece of that gap the report identified, whichever comes first. Subscribe so you're here for it, because I have a feeling this case still has more than one genuine surprise left in it before it's actually over.